Okay, so the next storyteller, it's my honor and privilege to introduce him. He's he's really an idiot. Um, and let me get his name here. This is difficult to pronounce here. It's me. It's me. So here goes. You're just like your father. When I was very small, I heard this all the time, oftentimes from my aunts, most of the time from my mother. It was usually after I got into trouble of some sort, so it really wasn't meant as a compliment. But that didn't matter to me because when I was small, I was, like many other small boys, my dad was my hero. When I was young, I thought there was nothing my dad couldn't do or hadn't done. He'd been everywhere, and he could fix anything. He was strong, he was smart, and best of all, he was funny. There's never been anyone who could make me laugh like my dad. I remember as a kid watching him interact with other adults, and it didn't take me long to notice that the other person was almost always smiling, if not laughing, at something my dad had said. He may have been scratching his head in confusion, because my dad had kind of a bizarre way of looking at the world, but you're almost always smiling and laughing. And it occurred to me at that young age that one of the best compliments you can give anybody, and it's certainly true of my dad, was he's good company. I can't think of anyone who ever spent any time with my dad who didn't leave feeling better than after they arrived. So, my dad was a master storyteller. He would have loved this stuff. His occupation for the last 35 years of his working life was an over-the-road truck driver. Now, let's just stop and think about that for a second. An over-the-road truck driver. Is that the stupidest job description you ever heard? Where in the hell else are you going to drive a big truck? It's like saying somebody's in an office accountant. But anyhow, he drove semi-trucks, the big rigs, 18-wheelers, and he drove them by night. And as a truck driver, he knew he wasn't paid just for showing up at some destination. He wasn't paid, for example, for arriving in a terminal in Cleveland. No, he was paid instead for navigating all the miles between Milwaukee and Cleveland. He was paid for the journey, not the destination. And this knowledge of the road informed his storytelling. Those poor impatient souls who were in a rush for a conclusion or even a point to a story would wind up frustrated and confused. But those of us who learned to strap ourselves in and let my dad take us on the hidden off-ramps and meandering back roads of his mind, we'd find unexpected treasures that lay there as he'd take you on these tangents that had nothing to do with the original story. And he described in vivid detail people, places, even meals he ate, had nothing to do with the story. And just when we thought he got to the point where he'd forgotten himself what the story was all about, he'd scratch the side of his head and stare off in the distance. And that was a signal we knew the punchline was coming, the payoff. And it was always so underwhelming that you couldn't help but laugh. And he'd laugh too. And one of the things I admired most about him is that he was always laughing at himself. If there's ever anyone who didn't take himself too seriously, it was my dad. Now, when I was young, my dad was my hero, as with many other young boys. And as I grew older, as many boys do, I began to notice flaws in my father. Same thing that, for example, that was sweet and charming at age 5, at age 14 was embarrassing. And as I grew older still, became an adult, I noticed other flaws in my father. For example, he was emotionally incomplete. And anything that demanded an honest emotional response, he struggled with, and he was very awkward with anything where he had to reveal a real emotion. And he had this really bad tendency of saying the most inappropriate things at the most inopportune times. Now don't get me wrong, I recognize these as just for what they were, minor character flaws. And I still loved them as much as I ever did. That continued unchanged. It's just that by now I was an adult and raising a family of my own, and I put away the need for heroes along with other childish things. Then in March of 1993, when I was 34 years old, my mom was diagnosed with inoperable brain cancer. And in November of the same year, my dad underwent emergency quadruple heart bypass surgery. That's a hell of a combination of words. I don't know if I got them in the right order or not, but quadruple bypass heart surgery, or heart quadruple, whatever. So in March of '94, my mom was hospitalized with a stroke. That signaled the beginning of the end. And they sent her home with a hospital bed to live out her final days in her familiar surroundings. So they installed a hospital bed in my mom and dad's, in the living room of my mom and dad's house up in northwestern Wisconsin. And my dad quickly took his favorite chair, his recliner, and he put it next to my mom's bedside, and he stood vigil over her day and night, sleeping in the chair. But my mom was deteriorating kind of rapidly. So my sister, Jenny, my sister-in-law, Sue, took leaves of absence from their jobs and their families and moved in with my mom and dad to help with the caregiving. So I was working 410s at the time, so I'd drive up either late Thursday night or early Friday morning and help out as much best I can, but the bulk of the caregiving was administered by my mom, by my dad, Sue and Jenny. So anyhow, so one weekend, mid-May, I think it was by now, my dad and I convinced Jenny and Sue to finally take a well-deserved break and go back and reconnect with their families and recharge for the home stretch that was waiting for us. And we figured that my dad and I could hold the fort down for 2 short days and one night. So Jenny and Sue left, and Saturday came. It was a beautiful day in May. Sun was shining. It was just a gorgeous, gorgeous day, and my mom was in good spirits and relatively coherent, and she slept a lot. So no issues at all that night. My dad was starting to nod off in his chair about 10 o'clock, and I was growing tired too, so I went to bed. So I went to bed, and I was saying my dad had his camper set up in the front yard by the driveway. So I was I was sleeping down there. We'd equipped the camper with this walkie-talkie gizmo that my wife and I got when our kids were small. And the thinking was that I'd hear any disturbance in the night, or my dad could call my name over that, and I'd be right up there to help. So about 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to the staticky sound of my mom and dad's voices. And I quickly realized my mom was having one of her bad episodes. I'd heard about these from Jenny and Sue, but I never witnessed any. And I got dressed and put my shoes on, and I remember reaching out, putting my hand on the doorknob of the camper. But as I listened to my increasingly agitated mother verbally assaulting my dad, I froze. I couldn't bear to see what I was hearing, and I froze. And strange musical interlude there, my phone. So anyhow, I listened on as my mother was getting more and more upset and emotional and agitated, and I just froze. I couldn't bear to see her like that. And my dad, meanwhile, same guy who was so emotionally incomplete, who always struggled at these situations. He was, frankly, he was amazing. He was calm, cool, never did call my name out. And he's patient, and he said and did absolute right things. And looking back on it years later, I'd recognize it for what I think it was, the purest and most perfect demonstration of love I've ever witnessed. But I didn't notice it at the time. At the time, all I felt was shame. My dad eventually got my mom calmed down. After 5 or 10 minutes, that felt like 50 minutes or an hour. And so the walkie-talkie eventually got quiet until it was completely silent. And I let go of the doorknob and I tried to go back to bed. But there was no way I could sleep. I was consumed by shame and remorse for my inaction. So finally, about 5:30, the sun was up, and the walkie-talkie seemed to be staring at me like it was accusing me of my cowardice. So finally I couldn't stand anymore, so I walked out of the camper, started up the driveway to my mom and dad's house. And I remember it was a beautiful morning, the sun was shining, it was making the dew on the grass kind of shine and sparkle. And there's the morning sound of songbirds just waking up. And I walked up the driveway, slowly made my way through the back door, through the kitchen, to the other end of my mom and dad's living room. We're on the opposite end. The sun was shining through the windows, bathing my mom in its light as she lay peacefully asleep in her bed. And there in his chair, the same place I left him the night before, with his hand on my mom's bed, about only a finger reach away from my mom, sat my dad, also peacefully asleep. And as I stood there in my mom and dad's living room, absorbing the quiet beauty of the moment and everything it represented, a funny thing happened to me. My dad became my hero again. Thank you. On that note, I think we'll stop for about a 15-minute break. I don't have any imparting words of wisdom, so